Hi, this is Brass Check, and a while ago I did a long call on just various elements of the COVID con as it appears in May. We're now in May 2021. And there was a little story that's embedded in there in that long screed, and I realized that it deserves its own show because it illustrates so much of the madness that's going on. So here's the situation. So we've got the NIH and CDC and WHO propaganda machine, and if you look at it, they're well compensated directly by pharmaceutical companies and by Bill Gates, who aspires to become a pharmaceutical monopolist. And when I say supported, I'm talking in Gates's case over $100 million given to The Guardian, big newspaper in England, given to NPR, our supposedly public radio network. By the way, if anybody is still giving to NPR, please stop. They are a sinister organization. There are plenty of local music. If you like music, I'm sure you can find a local music group to support directly. You do not need to give your hard-earned money to these vipers. So they've received a lot of money from NPR, I mean from Bill Gates, and if you listen to their coverage of COVID, it's just unhinged. They've also given money to Le Monde, which is the biggest newspaper in France, and El País, which is the biggest newspaper in Spain, the Los Angeles Times, and on it goes. So there's that layer of propaganda. Then there's NBC, which has also received several $1 million in gifts from Bill Gates to help their health reporting. I mean, it's such transparent fraud. It's almost unbelievable that everybody doesn't know this, but they don't. Then you have the legions of local media, which usually provide a pretty nice function, who won the Little League, game that night and who's getting married and, what pizzeria is opening, and parks and recreation department, what they're doing for the kids this summer. I mean, that's all good and important stuff. But they've all become junior epidemiologists and public health sleuths, and they're all COVID all the time. I cannot pick up a local paper or a regional magazine here that isn't at least 50 to 70% COVID stories. I mean, it's like nothing else is happening in the country or the world but COVID, COVID, COVID. Anyway, I'm going to draw attention to a particular regional magazine, and they had a story about the COVID long haulers, which we should all look into how that meme got created. It appears to have been a deliberate media creation. Um, I could give the story, but maybe I'll do that for another time. A deliberate media creation, and so the idea is that COVID is so terrible that people who get it never get better. Okay, so let's just unpack this. All right, there are a lot of people walking around who think they're healthy, who suddenly discover they're not. And part of it might be poor nutrition, part of it might be exposure to toxins, part of it might be lack of sleep, part of it might be unhealthy exercise. Yes, there is such a thing. Unhealthy foods, high level of stress, living in a polluted area. There's a lot of things that contribute to somebody being ill. And as we talked about on Brass Check before COVID even started, 80% of most medical problems are environmentally based. And that's the last place, by the way, your doctor will look. Right? He will open up the drug handbook and give you a drug. But anyway, there's a lot of people who think they're well who are kind of hanging on by a thread, and they're running on adrenaline, they don't know it, and all it takes is an accident or an illness or a shock or something to undermine their health for an extended time until they address the issues. So the idea that someone was 100% healthy and then had COVID, and now their health is ruined forever is a sketchy proposition at best. Okay, and of course we know that a lot of the people that are being called COVID long haulers are people that were subjected to ghastly medical procedures, including intubation, and that will make anybody sick for a long time, if not kill them. And we did a whole show on what intubation means. Maybe it's worth repeating. It means having a pipe rammed down your breathing, apparatus. In order to do that, they have to knock you out. They have to fill you with all kinds of analgesics, including fentanyl. Look it up. They also have to put you in a coma so that you don't move. That's paralytic drugs. And they have you on a constant drip of anywhere from 5 to 14 different drugs the entire time you're on the ventilator. Do you get fed? No. Do you get hydrated? I'm told by some nurses they don't even hydrate the patients. They just let the liquid in the drips that carry all the drugs do the hydration. Can you imagine anybody surviving that for more than a couple of weeks? Yeah, and yet people do. But when they do, of course, they're going to be debilitated for a long time afterwards. And it has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with the treatment they were given. So the other thing about COVID that we have to know is if you look up the definition of COVID on the CDC's own website, it's just a list of random symptoms that could be anything. Fever, fatigue, coughing, back pain. These things could be anything. So anybody that has those symptoms and comes up positive on the bogus PCR test, and we've talked about the PCR test at length, but it's worth repeating. The Nobel Prize winner who invented it, Kary Mullis, said that it should never, ever, ever be used for medical diagnosis because it's too unreliable. You can find anything with a PCR test if you set the cycle number high enough. And that's exactly what they did to build their case numbers. So you take somebody with a random set of symptoms that could be anything. You give them a PCR test and ramp up the number of cycles. You discover fragments of genetic material that indicate the potential of the existence, one-time existence in your body of something called SARS-2. They're calling SARS-2. And that becomes COVID. Right? So the whole diagnosis is a little bit shaky at best. And we know for a fact that they would call somebody that was 89 years old and had advanced cancer and died of a stroke. They would call that a COVID case because he had COVID in his blood sample, or not COVID, but the PCR evidence of fragments of genetic material. So the whole diagnostic thing is highly suspect at best. So what they're doing now is they're taking people who have other health problems, who've been diagnosed with COVID, and they're telling them, oh, you're a COVID long hauler. And that's, oh man, COVID's the most dangerous thing in the world because people get it and they never get better. And you know what? You can have a flu, you can have a cold, you could go through a period of stress, you could have an injury, you could have a couple of those things happen to you simultaneously. And if you had some underlying situation, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, lack of fresh air and exercise, age does come into this, that could knock you out. It could be the pharmaceutical drugs you're on, if you're on them, that's knocking you out. Of course, they'll never tell you that in a million years. So anyway, this is all prelude to this story. So in this little local magazine, they're talking about a woman, 82 years old, had COVID, and then had pretty severe fatigue for a long time afterwards. All right, again, I hate to say it, but we got to admit that 82 is not young, right? 82 is not the new 40. Okay, you are close. I'm not there yet, but I'm heading there. You're closer to the end than you are to the beginning, and you do slow down when you get older. I know. We're not allowed to talk about that. It doesn't happen. The advertisers tell us, you can, still rollerblade and play rollerblade hockey when you're 90 years old. It's just lunacy. You're not in as good shape at 82 as you are when you're younger. You have less reserves to draw on. So that's the beginning. The next thing, we have no idea what this woman's health was. She said she had abundant energy. Okay, maybe she did. Maybe she was also running on adrenaline. Maybe she was chronically malnourished because she was eating the standard American diet of crap. Maybe she was in the habit of not getting proper rest. We don't know of any of the things that contributed to her reaction, her post illness reaction to whatever illness it was she had. We don't know. But they're calling it long haul COVID, the new syndrome that's killing America. And that's why everybody has to get a vaccine. Okay, so that's fraud number one. Because, again, there are a lot of people that have just garden variety flus, colds, or just get run down and go for periods of weeks or months where they're just not feeling right. And it's usually, a lifestyle thing. And I don't mean, to blame people, but they may be they may have gone through a high stress situation. And that will contribute to a person's inability to shake off an illness. So anyway, the COVID long haul is a fraud. It seems to have been a deliberate media creation, and I'm going to look into that. It seems that they set the stage for it with a particular little vignette, and we'll look into that and see exactly how that meme was created. But it gets better. So this woman's 82, and so how did they treat her? Okay, did they treat her by looking at her sleep patterns and her her nutrition, how she eats? Her exposure to fresh air and sunshine, making sure she's hydrated, checking about the level of stress in her personal life. Did they do any of that? No. What they did was they treated her by giving her the vaccine. Okay, let's look at the absolute lunacy of that. This is somebody that they say had the disease. Therefore, she would develop antibodies to it. This is Science 101. She'd have immunity to getting the disease again. And we did a video a couple of days ago that shows that it's a rare person who tests positive after having had supposedly the disease. I think out of 43,000 cases, they had one person that caught it again and died. That's lightning strike territory. That's winning the lottery territory. And we don't know how sick that person was. We don't know what their pre-existing conditions were. We don't know what their comorbidities are. We just know that one out of the 40,000 who supposedly had COVID got it again and died. So it is a rare occurrence. So we know this woman is very unlikely to get COVID again, but somehow they gave her the vaccine anyway, which just shows you the total lack of scientific rigor and rationality in play here. But it gets better. She says, once I got the vaccine, I felt better. Based on what mechanism does a debilitated, depleted person who's already had a disease, shaken the original disease off, get better after being subjected to a vaccination? It makes no sense at all. And yet this is being reported as if it's sanity by this magazine, and it's being backed up by a physician. And it gets better. What's the other treatment they gave this 82-year-old woman that's having a little trouble recovering from whatever it was she had? They're giving her antidepressants. What is the medical theory behind that? She's weak. She's got low energy. She's easily fatigued. What does that have to do with chemical sledgehammers to change the neurochemistry in her brain? And it gets better than this, or worse than this, depending on your perspective. The physician, and I wish I had her name handy because she deserves public recognition for her idiocy, said, well, antidepressants are known to support a state of well-being, and that helps in the healing process. What? The whole science, the whole dubious garbage science of antidepressants is you have certain neurochemicals in your brain, and the relative balance, presence, absence, excess, deficiency of neurotransmitters, neurochemicals, has an influence on your functioning and your mood. That's the theory, and that's not garbage science. That appears to have been well established. The garbage science is thinking that you can fix that with chemical sledgehammers. And that's what Dr. Peter Breggin, Harvard-trained physician who studied this his whole life, calls these things. That's what I'm drawing a blank right now, but a very, very distinguished professor at Princeton who actually charted the original dopamine pathways and neurotransmitter pathway in the brain. When we went to lectures that he gave as undergraduates, he was really clear that you did not play at the game of changing people's blood neurochemistry with drugs. Maybe there are situations that are so severe, somebody's damaging themselves or they're of a danger to other people. Maybe you would do that. But the idea of just routinely handing these things out like candy because they promote well-being. This is an MD saying this. And I talk about this a lot. I'm going to hammer on it. Do not look at MDs as being particularly intelligent, insightful, or even ethical people. Some of them are, but they were before they became MDs. Being an MD did not make them into it. Your typical MD is somebody who at 18 decided they wanted to be a doctor, either for idealistic reasons or financial reasons. And don't think the financial reasons don't add into the equation. Having an MD is a license to print money for the rest of your life. You can always get employed at a very high hourly rate, even if you're a stumble bum, if you have an MD. You just have to show up relatively sober and you can get employed somewhere if you follow whatever rules you're given. That's the reality of what that piece of paper is worth. And they're all in terror of losing it. So you start at 18 and you study chemistry and physics and biology and all these things, and you make sure that you get straight A's so that you can get into a medical school, and then you repeat the process, and then you go through the ordeal of medical school, and then you go through the ordeal of a residency, and 10, 12, 15 years later, having not really had a normal life, and being indoctrinated in a very, very narrow and particular way of thinking, you come out the other end with your degree. Amazingly, there are human beings that go through that process and come out intelligent and independent and ethical and insightful. Don't count on the vast majority of them being that way. So here we have a doctor telling an 82-year-old woman who has fatigue that the salvation to her problem is to take antidepressants because it elevates the mood. I mean, a drunk on a park bench who didn't finish high school could give a better diagnosis and treatment than that. And yet this woman's in a local magazine as a hero, and this is being held up as the model for everybody. Got fatigue? Take an antidepressant. And, as I said in the previous thing, every one of these pharmaceutical drugs is a poison. Okay? Every one of them. And this is not controversial. Just read the inserts that come with the product. And all of them can be used to injure somebody if you take an overdose of them. Some more severe than others. So their theory is, it's their theory. If we give people this particular poison to alter this particular functioning in their body, it will change their blood chemistry, their tests will look better, and now they're healed. Of course, we've got to keep them on the drug forever. I mean, this is literally the theory of modern medicine. And the introduction of psychotropic drugs, and that's really what antidepressants are in the 80s. By the medical profession, and now normalizing them so that it's just normal to give somebody a drug that alters their brain chemistry. And it doesn't just, by the way, it alters their brain chemistry by interfering with the natural production and regulation of neurochemicals, right? It's not just it's not like a little vitamin that gives you the neurotransmitters and chemicals you need. It actually, impairs your your neurons at a cellular level to change the neurotransmitter mix. You can read Peter Breggins' work on this. He's an MD. He's Harvard trained. This is not some wild theory. This is how they are designed to work. So imagine 82-year-old woman. She's had some kind of respiratory disease, and she's not springing back. Okay, and again, look, 82 is not 50. It's not 40. It's not 30. It's 82, and you might have a little longer time to recover. And so people at that age, by the way, there's a whole rack, and you can do this research, and you should, of commonly prescribed pharmaceutical drugs to people that are older that should not be prescribed to them. There's a list. Maybe I'll do a show on that. And most doctors are so freaking ignorant that they just go ahead and prescribe them anyway. They don't. And so why is there that? Why does this list exist? This list exists because it's known in gerontology, which is the science and the medicine of treating people who are older, that there's a distinct difference in the body's ability to handle and process certain pharmaceutical drugs as you get older. It's distinct and it's serious. And drugs can actually create the symptoms of disease and injure people and impair people, especially when they get older. So it's very important for people to know that, that you have to change things when you get older. You can't just keep acting like you're 20 years old. So here we have this physician prescribing antidepressants to an 82-year-old woman whose presenting symptoms are basically fatigue following some kind of respiratory illness. I mean, that should be malpractice. That should be losing your license. But no, she's so confident in what she's doing, she can talk about it publicly, and the public reads the story and thinks, well, gee, maybe I should take an antidepressant too. I'm a little tired lately. This is medicine 2021, pure garbage that's injuring people. And this was going on before COVID, and it will continue if we ever get through this thing. And we were reporting on this long before. One of our very first stories at Brass Check back in the 90s was the explosion of the prescription of psychoactive drugs to school children. It was a monstrosity then. It's a monstrosity now. Anyway, this is Brass Check, giving you the health information that you're definitely not going to get from NBC or NPR or any of the other organizations that receive $1 million, no strings attached checks from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you're a supporter, thank you very much. The reason you're hearing this is because you're a supporter. The reason other people are able to hear this and learn and protect themselves is because you're a supporter. And I want to encourage other people, if you're benefiting from this, there are many other people that could benefit too. And maybe you might consider supporting Brass Check and the research and analysis that we do.